don't lose my sense of direction. I want to go over 2 short stories from the Bible that you're all familiar with, should be. One is Mark 5. If you have a Bible, follow along. One is Mark 5, starting at verse 25. This is a story I'm sure most of us, if not all of us, have heard before. And a woman who had an issue of blood 12 years and had suffered many things of many physicians and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. Having heard the things concerning Jesus, came in the crowd behind and touched his garment. For she said, if I touch but his garments, I shall be made whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her plague. Yes. Jesus said, who touched me? Down to verse 31. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what she had been done to her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. And he said unto her, daughter, your faith has made you whole. Go in peace and be free of your plague.
Yes.
Now the same story is pretty well said again in both Matthew and in Luke, with little variations. Now go over to Mark 10. Down to verse 46. And they came to Jericho, and as he went out from Jericho with his disciples and a great multitude, the son of Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the wayside. And when he heard that it was Jesus the Nazarene, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me. And many rebuked him, that he should hold his peace. But he cried out the more a great deal. And Jesus stood still and said, call you him. So they called the blind man, saying of him, be of good cheer, he calls you. And he, casting away his garment, sprang up and came to Jesus. And Jesus said, what wilt thou that I should do unto you? And the blind man said, Rabbi, that I may receive my sight. And Jesus said unto him, go thy way, your faith hath made you whole. And straightway he received his sight and followed him in the way. 2 stories. There's 2 aspects to each story. I'm going to do one this week and finish it next week. But as Paul Harvey used to say, there's the rest of the story. Because the Bible can't give you every detail. So let's go back to the first one for a minute. The lady with the discharge of blood. I'm sure any woman here would be pretty distressed if they had a discharge of blood for 12 years.
Yes.
That sounds pretty incredulous today, because today something would be done about it. But they didn't really have a lot to deal with back when this Bible was written. And you've got to think about it. If you had a discharge of blood for 12 years, you'd be dead. I mean, how much blood can you lose? So this was probably a very small amount of blood, but combined with something else. And one of the biggest problems in those days was a fistula that developed between the bladder and the bowel, so that you'd have the blood containing with either urine or pus from the vagina or feces. Which means not only would you have a discharge, but there would be a bad odor all the time. And this was for 12 years. She put up with this. Now, she tried to clean herself. She tried to get rid of this. She went to everybody she could think of, to no avail. So she tried to heal herself in that respect, but to no avail. Further, there was another problem. Go back to the book of Leviticus, chapter 15. Down to verse 25. Because this compounds the situation considerably. This is the law of Moses, the Levitical law. If a woman has an issue of her blood many days, not in the time of her impurity, or her period, or if she have an issue beyond the time of her period, all the days of her issue of her uncleanness, she shall be impure, she is unclean. Every bed that she lies on shall be unclean. Everything she touches, sits on, shall be unclean. Whosoever touches those things shall also be unclean. So not only was she having this discharge, this issue of blood, but she was considered unclean. She could not be with a man. She could not touch things that other people were there. She could not go to the temple. She could not get a sacrifice. She could not go to the market. For 12 years, she was in isolation, like a leper. She wondered she didn't commit suicide. Many people would. But she spent all her money trying to clear herself of this malady, to no avail. But she tried. Now, go to Bartimaeus for a minute. He was a blind beggar. We don't know how long he was blind, maybe from birth, maybe from an accident. But most people who were begging in those days would be at the city gate. That's where the action was. So he'd be sitting at the city gate, begging. People there rebuked him. Perhaps they were tired of his begging. Perhaps they were tired of his constantly being there, constantly in their face, so to speak. But if he was begging at the city gate and he was blind, the most likely thing is that he slept there as well. Which means he didn't wash. Which means he would have an odor. Which means he probably had matted, unkempt hair, dirty beard. He just was not a very nice person to be around. But yet when he heard Jesus, he called out to him. Now the idea of this is that regardless of the woman being unclean, and in spite of all her attempts to cure herself, she failed. But Jesus still looked after her. Yes. Bartimaeus was unclean in a physical way. There's no indication that he tried to clean himself up. But Jesus still looked after him. The point is that we're all blind. We all are blind to ourselves, to our sin. We're all blind to the way we live. And even if we try to clean ourselves up, we can't. We can go all sorts of places and spend all sorts of money and do all sorts of things, but we'll never clean ourselves. up. Bartimaeus was accursed. He was a cursed man because of his blindness. And he was also in a cursed city, Jericho. Jericho was cursed by Joshua. Go back to chapter 6 and you'll see that. So, like these two people, we are all blind. We're all in accursed cities. And we all try in vain to clear ourselves up. I'm sure this woman, because of her discharge, put her rags, put the things she used for her diapers, so we say, because there was no Pampers in those days, no Depends. She'd have to wash these and put them out in the line for everyone to see. And if she had any pride left at all, that would take care of it. The rags that she used to keep herself from bleeding down her leg. Isaiah 64:6 says this. But we are all unclean, and all our righteous acts are like filthy rags. We all shrivel up like a leaf, and like the wind sweeps us away. You see, the idea is that no matter what we do, we're all blind. We all are filthy in many ways. Only Christ can clear us out. But there's a catch. And that's, between now and then, something to think about.